Boo, boo, boo. Hello, everyone. This is Connor, and welcome back to Person of Interest. My next guest I speak to is Alex Lederman, who is a sex and porn addiction therapist based out of Houston, Texas. We talk about things like addiction, trauma, porn, and also addiction styles and treatment. We did this over Zoom, so you may notice that the audio quality is a little iffy. I do apologize for that. But regardless, I think it's still listenable, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks so much. The first question I have is, what is your background in sex and porn addiction?
Well, my basic background is I have a master's degree in education as well as a license to practice therapy in the state of Texas, my LPC, my licensed professional counselor. I received special education, which certifies me as a certified sex addiction therapist. And that was from the main program here in the U.S. that certifies people in that. And that's from an organization, ITAP. I always forget the name of the acronym, but it really deals with trauma because everything involved in sex and porn addiction is based on trauma. And then obviously through time with experience with real people. 98% of my clientele are people that see me specifically because they have either an addiction to pornography or an addiction to sex, or they happen to be partners of people that are addicted. So we call that betrayed partners.
In the treatment of porn and sex addiction, if you could imagine porn addiction as one sphere and sex addiction as another sphere, do they always overlap or are they sometimes separate?
Both. I mean, there's some people that adhere to do nothing but look at pornography, and that's their addiction. And the idea of actually being with a real life person scares the bejesus out of them. So that's why pornography is perfect. They don't have to be with a real person. Now, there's some people, a lot, I'm talking, percentages, but, it's not enough. And then they go over to the next border, and then they actually get involved in affairs, paid sex, things like that. So it's a combination. So that's why they make the distinction between pornography and sex addiction. Sex addiction is probably better defined by being in type of sexual relationship where another person's involved in your addiction, whereas porn addiction is specific to basically you being by yourself and engaging in pornography.
Do you find that there seems to be an uptick in porn addiction with young people or with people who just haven't actually been sexually active with another person?
Oh, no. I mean, a certain percentage of the kids gravitate towards porn. Pornography's been with us 10,000 years. You can go to the caves there in France where they have Neanderthals, and you'll see big-breasted women and all sorts of things that are actually pornographic. The distinction is that it's okay to look at porn. It's even okay to masturbate as long as it doesn't become an addiction. And an addiction simply is this. It's a behavior that you want to stop and you cannot. We're talking about biology. When kids are growing up, everyone masturbates. It's only when you let the behavior become unmanageable, where it interferes with your life, and even if you want to stop, you cannot.
I'm just imagining that a traumatic event or some big event leads to a realization that maybe I should see a therapist. Is that typically the way that most people decide to seek therapy, or do they maybe do it preemptively and think that I don't think I'm out of control, but I could see it getting out of control?
The real answer is 98% of the people that see me finally get discovered by their partner because they're leading a secret life. And that's when they look for help. It's not because they figure, there's a percentage that do recognize that their life is not going the way they want it to go. And they know they're not in relationships, or the relationships they have are not fulfilling, or they're causing problems. But that's a small percentage. Most call because their wife discovered them, and now it's come out. And their actual call is to try to save the marriage by taking action and showing their partner that they're doing something. So that's really how it starts. It's not because when they get up and say, hey, this is, I can't do this anymore.
So when seeking therapy, it's not just going to sessions, it's also practicing, I guess, a controlled behavior and not indulging in the things that brought you to therapy in the first place. Do you think that with how accessible porn is and really the fact that you're not monitoring what they're doing after hours, that can make it difficult to effectively treat sex and porn addiction?
I see four types of patients. I see the first type of patient that comes to me because they get caught and their wife or their partner wants them to go to therapy. Some of these people don't even think they have a problem, but because they want to keep peace at home, they see me. But they don't really think there's a problem. So if there's nothing broken, there's nothing to fix. Then there's another group of people that realize they may have a problem, but when they look at all that needs to be, all that's required for them to deal with their problem, they become overwhelmed. The cure is too overwhelming, so they'd just rather stay with the behavior. That's their desire. A third kind of patient I see is someone who knows they have a problem, but they want me to fix them, but they don't want to do the work. And the last type is those people that realize they're 40 years old or whatever it is. They don't want the next 40 years of their life to in any way resemble the previous one. And those are the ones that do best in therapy.
I know every case probably has its differences and its unique aspects to it, but is there like a general framework that starts with maybe acceptance and then goes through a step-by-step process?
There's some people that accept they have a problem. Some people see me, I can see them for weeks or months, and they're never really wanting to do everything necessary to deal with the problem. But it's still comfortable for them to come and talk to me just because they have no one else to talk to about it. But they may not have made the decision that they really want to put it into their behavior. There may be a point in time that after they do that, they'll realize, now I have to make a change. And that's part of it. Some people jump into it. Some people take a longer time getting there.
With how widespread porn is, even at like a very early age, like any device can access the internet and could conceivably access porn. So do you think that makes it a unique challenge in relation to other addictions?
It makes it easier to access, but the same thing could be said of alcohol. There's people that can have alcohol in the home and never have any interest in touching it.
How do you get better as a therapist? Is it training? Is it seeing patients? Is it going to, I don't know, conferences and actually seeing some sort of positive uptick in some scale? Is there a way that therapists are, I guess, graded, or is it all feedback from patients that you see?
Everyone I see has a similar problem, but they're still different. Second of all, I do a lot of outside reading on the topic from various authors that I actually know because of the training, because we're all part of the same group in terms of being a certified sexual addiction therapist. Most of the authors I read are also CSAT. That's the acronym is CSAT. Are also CSAT. So I read their certified sexual addiction therapist. I also do a lot of independent research, and then I become more knowledgeable. So if there's something I didn't know, for instance, like that there's high correlation between attachment styles. Attachment styles is how people communicate with each other and how they relate. I found out that it actually relates very well in sex addiction therapy. So I did a lot of study into attachment styles. Kids grow up with a father who's either not there or not available, or a mother who's not available because she's preoccupied trying to take care of the household, especially if there's no father in the house. So basically, you grow up alone. And when you grow up alone, you grow up realizing that it's not really being safe to be close to people, because they will disappoint you, like your dad disappoints you, like or your mother's not there and she disappoints you. So you end up depending upon yourself. The message you get when you're 5 or 10 years old is that it's safer not to be close to people. And also at the same time, the message is that there's something wrong with me because something's happened and my father left. It must be my fault, or I can't do anything right because he always criticized me. So that means I'm a failure. So those were the kind of stuff, that's kind of made up stuff when you're between 5 and 10 or 12 years old, you make up as a kid because you never blame your parents for being bad parents. You blame yourself because you've done something wrong. That's why your parents don't love you. And that goes with you through the rest of your life. And it's so painful, you have to cope somehow. And some people cope trying to make themselves feel good through sex and porn addiction.
So that's how, I guess, trauma may lead to a lack of trust or fear of connecting with other people, which then branches into some form of addiction. Is that like a common chain you see?
Not everyone that comes from that background turns into an addict. Many of them navigate that life and are successful in life and they do okay. But everyone that becomes an addict comes from that background.
So addiction, it seems like it may stem from just early childhood, and that just extends on throughout their life. It's that early on that it can occur?
Oh, they grew up with a tremendous amount of guilt and shame. Yeah. When you're a kid, like I said, you don't blame your parents. You blame yourself. And if your parents are critical or they're not there, the stuff you make up is they don't love me, and that's because I'm not good enough. So you grew up with a lot of shame, and the shame is actually exacerbated because now when you get a little older, you cope with pornography, and there's a lot of shame around that. Yeah, shame is probably the cornerstone of anyone with an addiction.
One thing I saw, and I'm assuming this relates to porn, you have called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing training. Does that relate to porn and maybe screen addiction of some sort?
No, EMDR is just another form of therapy that was developed by a woman years ago named Francine Shapiro, where she just discovered that, made the discovery that when people were in sleep, their deep sleep is called rapid eye movement or REM sleep. And usually at that point in time, that's when people have thoughts about their past. If you wake them up about that time, they can tell you that they're thinking about sometimes something traumatic that happened a long time ago. So she made that connection that if we can actually make that happen in real life and identify the trauma, maybe instead of getting this fragment, this is disconnected and maybe not very accurate, if we can somehow take that trauma and put it in context, then that would help someone deal with the trauma. So it had nothing to do with sex addiction or anything like that. That's just a separate form of therapy. That's not to say it can't be used, because I've used it, with some of my clients. But it works best with people that have deep trauma. For instance, someone grows up in a household where there's a lot of psychological, physical, or emotional and sexual abuse. And a lot of people are traumatized from that environment. It affects them in their life. So EMDR basically is a physical form of therapy, either through eye movement or through touching or through listening, feeling tapping in your hands or hearing sounds in your ear. What that does is it puts you in a relaxed state, and then the therapist will ask you to remember the event and keeps working with you till you put that event into an entire context. And then over time, the enormity of that trauma lessens. So it could be used for sex addiction or any other traumatic event.
I think that most people, if they don't have an addiction with porn, at least have some sort of relationship with it, meaning that at least most, maybe from a young adult on, they watch porn in some capacity. Do you think there's that a lot more people are maybe addicted to porn than they might be willing to admit to, but they've never just faced the fact that perhaps this thing that I really enjoy, it's beyond just pleasure. It's kind of a thing I can't escape.
I think about 3 to 6% of the population does have some type of porn addiction or sex combination porn addiction. So 3 to 6% is a lot of people. But it never becomes a problem until it becomes a problem. For instance, if you enjoy sitting home, you don't have relationships, and you're home getting your sex just by sitting home on a Friday night and watching porn all night, and no one else is affected, and you don't have any desire to want to meet any other people, is it a problem? I don't know. Now, it could be a problem if someone says, I'm tired of being by myself, and I really want to be with a real person, but this porn thing is keeping me from doing that, and then that's a problem. it's a problem because I enjoy watching it so much. I do it at work and I got caught. I got fired. Well, then that's a problem. Now people get fired, because they forget that people at work notice their absences when they spend an hour in the men's room in the toilet, or masturbating. Or people are smarter now, but in the past they would be using work computers, and they get caught watching porn online, things like that. But it becomes a problem when you lose your job. It gets to be a problem when you lose your wife or your partner. It gets to be a problem if you're 50 years old and you're by yourself and you're lonely and you don't want to tolerate life like this anymore. Anyone who has a problem with pornography or sex, especially pornography as well as sex addiction, tend to be isolated individuals. They make the determination that I'd rather have sex by myself than with a real person, because that's what it's really about. We can call it pornography, we call it masturbation, but someone's making the determination, I'd rather have sex by myself than with another real person. It starts when they're a kid. Fear of attachment, fear of relationships. When you get into a support group, one of the benefits of a support group is takes you away from isolation to being with other people that share the same problem. In fact, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Because everything when we're talking about sex addiction, porn addiction, all it really is it comes under the heading of a couple of things: intimacy disorders and obsessive compulsive behaviors. That's really what it's about. We can call it sex and porn, but it's an intimacy disorder, and in many cases, if someone is masturbating daily 3 times a day, it's an obsessive compulsive behavior. It has nothing to do with sex. It has everything to do with not being able to be with people, and it has everything to do with the fact that you're obsessed with some type of behavior that you can't stop.
Say there's somebody who they think they might have a problem, and they think that they haven't yet, but they might branch out into, a point of no return, if you will. Do you have any advice? And you were saying like maybe get connected, support groups, things like that. But do you have any advice for somebody who might be in a position where they think they're struggling?
Well, again, they have to ask themselves these 2 questions. One, is this a behavior I want to stop and I can't? And 2, is it interfering with my life? And if the answer is yes to both, then they need to find some help. Remember, it's okay to look at porn occasionally. It's like having a glass of wine on a Friday night, But a 6-pack every night of the week is a whole different issue. It's a matter of scale and proportion and how it affects your life. I don't think having a glass of wine on a Friday night affects your life in any way in a negative manner if you're not an alcoholic.
That's all the questions I have, Alex. Thank you very much for sharing your time with me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Have a great week.